Danny, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, we got Danny Rensch here. Quite a freaking story, from a barefoot kid in the Arizona mountains to a fringe cult to the founder and creator of the largest online chess platform.
It's wild when you say it like that, but I guess it's true. So,
and wait, didn't even graduate high school, or
no, high school dropout.
High school dropout.
Yeah.
How come those are always the best stories, dude?
It's funny. Now I'm a proud high school dropout.
Yeah.
You spend years like wondering whether you can, open with that conversation or lead with that conversation. But I should say that I'm a co-founder. So my partner is the Stanford MBA. So he checks all the boxes that were required when you're doing this stuff, So he wouldn't say that. But I used to keep that to myself. Now I'm proud to say that I'm a high school dropout and figured it out.
Well, I mean, guys like, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates have made it cool. Well, I mean, we can go to the education system, but that's not why we're here. It's funny you say check the boxes, because I did the same thing. If I knew things could be different, I would have left the house at like 17 and joined the military and just not graduated high school. God love my parents. But so when I read barefoot kid, just dirt poor family.
Yeah. Well, I was born into the collective that I have now come to name for what it is, which is a cult. And I didn't necessarily realize that at the time, but we were a totally financially merged communism system. And as is the case with communism, often it doesn't lead to what they say. What does Orwell say, right? There are equal and those who are more equal. And so you have sort of a hierarchy and a ranking system. And I was not near the top of that. And so we were all living below the poverty line, and no shoes. There was a shoe list where you had to get your name on the shoe list to get shoes, which you would learn with time that there actually was no shoe list, which is a funny thing. So I was born in I was born in Mesa, Arizona.
Yeah.
A member of the Church of Immortal Consciousness. I was born a member. And at some point in my very early childhood, the group relocated to northern Arizona, Tono Village, in order to be a little more off the beaten path and kind of away from mainstream society. And so, I grew up as a kid in the backwoods of the Tono National Forest and running around, and it was awesome, actually, from that perspective.
Northern Arizona, we're talking cold winters, snow.
Yes.
No shoes.
Well, we had shoes, we had boots. In fact, what we would often do, I'm glad you asked that, because we had boots that were old and not equipped for what we were doing. And so everyone knows the trick. If you're poor, is you wrap a plastic bag, you get Walmart bags and you wrap it around, and they're perfect because you can actually tie it right above your ankles. So that actually wasn't that bad. Plus it makes it easier to slide up and down the hills when you have plastic bags on your boots. So, a lot of things about the financial outlook, even if as a kid you don't appreciate it for what it is, and you don't even have the thoughts of, oh, something's wrong here. It just is what it is, right? With time, you go, oh, there was a shoe list, and everybody got food delivered once a week in a bucket, and the rations were sort of divvied out based on the number of people in the household. And you had, there was a shared storage room where everyone had buckets of rice and beans and flour and things, and you could go like get yours and take it back to your house. And so that was how we lived. It was completely financially merged. Everything was merged. That was sort of the idea of the collective. So
farms,
no
cattle,
farms. One of the things that's funny is for a group that was trying to live off the grid and practice an occult belief, right, a non-mainstream denomination belief system. They weren't doomsday preppers on the far extreme. So I'll check that. And they also weren't even doing a very good job to live off the grid and be sort of self-sustaining. It was a world where you had a lot of people who had jobs in the real world, right? You had blue collar and white collar jobs, but then they came home to the collective where everything was put into one pot. All the money was merged. And then, things were purchased based on what people needed or based on their status or based on what was going on after things were merged. But my biological father, my dad, who I didn't know was my dad, and maybe we'll get into that if you want, but he was a lawyer. He was an attorney. So he actually did well for himself in the world from a financial perspective, and was bringing his money to the collective. That there were also people who didn't have, maybe as well paying jobs, but that was sort of a quick kind of outline of how it was working.
And he never said, this doesn't seem fair, I'm bringing in the lawyer's salary.
Well, he did. But the thing is, my dad also, as things eventually fell apart, a lot of people had a lot of gripes about a lot of things, right? And one of the top of the list of my dad's was this, like, hey, I was contributing more financially to this place than everybody else. Now, my dad was also the number 2 in the collective, literally from a ranking perspective. So he was also, to many people, one of the top perpetrators in terms of abuse that happened, and generally just things that weren't okay about the collective came down from leadership. And so there's both sides to that story, right? My dad was one of the top earners and one of the top contributors in his mind. He was also one of the top takers and living sort of at the top of there was a literal have and have not system in my childhood. So there was like people who were ranked as the haves and people who were ranked as the have-nots. And that was an actual thing that was both open and kind of privately known in terms of how people stood in terms of their status. Is this making sense here? We're jumping right in. So I'm getting a little bit.
I'm sorry, the hypocrisy of it is ripe.
To say the least. I would say, so to back up for a second, because I think this will help a little bit. Yeah. So the community was founded by Stephen and Trina Camp. They were the founding members, and Trina Camp was a trance medium. So she tranced a spirit who channeled and gave messages and readings and gave people life advice and these sort of things, right? Her and Stephen did this actually for a very long time, traveling. They were doing trance circles all over the U.S. in the 60s and 70s and into the early 80s, right? And then when they decided that they didn't want to travel anymore and they were going to form a collective, there's all kinds of debates from early members now, depending on where they sit in their view. Was it always intended that it was about to become a cult, or was this an accidental thing that happened, right? Well, we can get into that however you want, but regardless, a community was formed. The decision was made that everything would be financially merged. It would be a communist collective. It would be full of members who are there to practice the teachings of the spirit. And regardless of what you did in the world, you were there bought in on the same belief system, which is not just that things are financially merged, because everything on the planet is a material overcoming. The idea is that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience. You are not a physical being trying to get in touch with their soul. So the fundamental idea is, which again can be super healthy and benign depending on your outlook in life, right? But there's a lot of examples that we'll get into where you see very clearly areas where there can be a really great message and you can still see it misused by the messenger.
Oh, of course.
Right. And of course, religion is full of that kind of stuff, right?
You say cult and I'm like, I was raised in a cult too. It's called the Catholic Church.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's all kinds of ways where every mainstream religion crosses the line from saying that they have a really great story that could make you a better person to then telling you they're the ones with all the answers. And now they're the ones, so that happens everywhere. But my mom and my dad moved there before I was born. And very quickly, we're on kind of a fast track to divorce. And part of that was because my dad rose very quickly in kind of the way of the spiritual teaching, kind of the performance that was required to kind of be considered one of the higher spiritual leaders in the collective. And my mom wasn't really up to snuff in the same way. She didn't keep up. And then my dad left my mom and married Stephen and Trina's oldest daughter, who was only 19, and my dad was 38. So that was a big deal and not a thing that would be, considered good.
How old are you at this point?
I was just being born. So my dad and mom had me, and my dad left my mom for this other woman. So I guess I'm getting there because we kind of started with my dad accidentally, which is like my dad was one of the most devout followers. He also, in his mind, was one of the highest contributors, both in terms of the spiritual practice and also the money he brought in. But he was also undeniably taking advantage of a patriarchy where he was a 38-year-old man marrying a 19-year-old woman and had a lot of power and influence over a lot of people. And there's probably a very short list of people who would give him compassion for the money he lost, given like how he sort of perpetrated in the collective. And now I'm being born into this situation with my dad marrying a 19-year-old woman and my mom being sort of cast down to kind of the bottom of the whole system. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how old were you before you left the collective?
So my story of leaving the collective is
And do you write about it in your book?
Yeah, I do, for sure. Everything's on the table today.
And first off, great title, guys. He's got a book called Dark Squares coming out. And the subtitle is?
Dark Squares, How Chess Saved My Life. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
Great title. Did you come up with that, or did the writers?
Actually, no, an editor did.
Yeah, hey, that's the game.
And it was a great suggestion. I obviously had veto power, but I'm not going to pretend that I came up with it. So yeah, jumping ahead, I'm just going to say now for anyone watching this, forgive me if I ever say the thing of, oh, it's in the book. I'm actually not even trying to do that to advertise. There are some subjects that are so big, it's hard for me to go, well, there's more of this in the book, but here's what I'll tell you, right? So I'm not doing that intentionally, but it is.
And if he does, that's okay.
Well, yeah.
That's called marketing.
We'll bust him up. But so fast forward later on, and there's a very wild story within how we got there, but I've categorized what happened to the group I was in, which is, the truth is, it took me many years even to just name it a cult, because being in a cult is not something that you know when you're in a cult, right? And if you're born into it, and if you're indoctrinated and properly sort of brainwashed, there's no reason you would ever think that.
Normal.
In fact,
normal.
If anything, you're sort of, bow turned against the world against that type of label. And not all for bad reasons either, because there are all kinds of ways where the term cult is used, where if you are a member, it can be like, well, come, give me a second, right? And so there are all kinds of ways it took me a very long time, all kinds of reasons it took me a very long time to kind of acknowledge that this was a high control, high demand cult that I was raised in, and that it did a ton of damage to my life and many, many others. But with that said, I would say that my experience of it was more that it sort of imploded on itself than I even left. Now, I would say I left the cult emotionally, mentally, spiritually many years before I physically left. But one of the things that happened was I was married very young, had kids very young, literally in survival, trying to make ends meet and make my marriage work at the start of chess.com. And as that was happening, I kind of have described it a few times to people to say, it wasn't like I just woke up in the middle of the night and said, I've been in a cult my whole life. It's time to get out of here, right? It was more like I found a way to live within the eye of the hurricane. Like as I became conscious and aware of what this was, what wasn't okay, the reason I've said many times that the subtitle is How Chess Saved My Life is because I do believe that chess ultimately gave me an education, because I was able to travel and gain perspective and see the world in a different way. I felt much more empowered to kind of have my own agency within what was happening versus waking up in the middle of the night and throwing my kids in the car and saying, we're out of here, right? And so there were some people who did that, by the way. There were things like that happened, but that wasn't my experience.
So first off, as your dad leaves, he's influential within the group. Your mom is at the have-not. Where did you fall in that spectrum?
So my story is that my mom had me, and my dad left to marry Marlo when I was literally a teeny baby. I didn't know my dad. I was raised in the collective with Steve Rensch, my father being the most powerful man in many ways to my generation, because Stephen Camp was sort of the god on high, but Steve Rensch was in many ways like the acting enforcer of the teaching. To a lot of people outside the collective, they would say they might have thought that Steve Rensch was the guy, right? And I grew up like many kids who weren't actually Rensch's. My name was not Rensch. My name was Samson. My name was my mom's name. And then eventually it was Gordon because she remarried. But I grew up like every other kid, just totally afraid of my dad, because my dad's nickname in the collective was literally Dr. Death. Like he was the guy who like single women would call in when their kids were acting out so that he could come down and like yell at them and lay down the law. And my dad was not my dad. And I only found out my dad was my dad because when I was 7, his daughter, the first daughter he had with Marlo after me, so my half-blood sibling on that side, she had a crush on me. And we're in elementary school. And she's 6 and I'm 7. Or I might even been 8, like 7 and 8. And she is like, oh, Mom and Dad, I like Danny. And they're like, oh, shit, we got to talk to her about this, right? Like, this is not okay, right? That's the level of incest and the level of denying that was going on. And I had enough, like, memories of being a kid when my mom remarried a man named Dennis. I had enough memories to kind of know that he wasn't always my dad, but I wasn't conscious enough to like interrogate those or even really give a shit, right? So as far as I was concerned, my family was my mom, Dennis was my dad, my stepdad. I had a younger brother named Josh, who my mom had from a man who was literally in the collective for like a single night, got my mom pregnant and gone. So I had a half brother now with Josh, and that was our family. And I only found out that my dad, this like incredibly intense minister of the Church of Immortal Consciousness, was my dad when my sister said she had a crush on me. So that's how I found out at the age of 8. So I was to answer your question, I was at the bottom of the totem pole. I was with my mom in the have-not lane.
Damn.
Yeah.
And now, did he ever approach you, or you approach him to like, hey, can we have a conversation about this?
So that was when I found out. I was 8, and to remind everybody where we're at in this fun story, I'm living happily, broke as shit and totally poor, but enjoying it because you're a kid. You love your reality. We play all the time. There's no part of my life that isn't anything but a village kid. Now I even know that he's my dad, but nothing changes. He doesn't make any effort to have a relationship with me. I don't even think I'm supposed to have a relationship with him, because one of the other core principles of the teaching is that materials are meant to be overcome because they're temporary. We've had many lifetimes. We will have many lifetimes to go. You're not here to have materials. That's why we're all merged. But also, biology is temporary, because if you think about it from a perspective that you're a soul incarnating to have lessons and to have experiences, the biology is also just what you happen to choose to learn something. It's not the end all be all. And so I was not told or encouraged in any way to care about my relationship with my dad. And in fact, if anything, because there were all kinds of politics and areas where I was a have-not, it would have been considered spiritually unrighteous for me to try to claim that he was my dad. It was like literally said to me like, hey, he's not your spiritual father, which is the more important father than biological father. Your spiritual parents are the more important thing. So I was very quickly like, okay, we told you this so that you and Bean, that was her nickname, Bean, so that you and Bean don't like each other. By the way, there's this other girl who's also your half sister. You can't date her because that was from your dad having a one-night stand with another woman who's still in the collective. Her name is Shalana. So I'm educated very quickly at the age of 8 that I can't like Shalana. I can't like Bean. Now I know I have this group of like half siblings. My dad is this high on minister, but I go back to being a village kid. Like that's the answer. And I don't ever really have another conversation with my dad until I was 12. And that was when I had already become a really great chess player, and he gave me a talk that I share in the book as like the first time I really came into knowing who my dad was as like a spiritual warrior. And I can share that conversation if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
First off, the fact that you have to hear all that at 8.
Yeah. It's wild.
Man, I'm trying to remember back. I think that's a little too much for me.
Yeah.
No 8-year-old is going to comprehend that
Yeah.
completely and fully understand it.
Well, not only that, one of the things we cut from my book, I'll just share, is not only was that way too much, there were so many things about the teaching that, again, now as an adult, I have the ability to frame what is the baby and what is the bathwater. I can actually see for myself, hey, I understand why this is a principle. I understand what integrity means. I understand what we are trying to do as we evolve toward our highest selves and what these tools of purpose and telling the truth could be. And I now have a really clear example of how all of those can be weaponized, used against people, and damage their spiritual self-worth and everything else, right? So, but what I'm saying is, not only do I have perspective that like that was way too much for an 8-year-old, the fact that it even waited till I was 8 is already super fucked up. I should have known he was my dad. And the fact that they were keeping it so separate was really based on the fact that my dad and Marlo, his new wife, didn't even really want to acknowledge. Yeah. I wasn't supposed to be a part of that. But my mom, for whatever reasons, which we should get into later, didn't want to leave the collective. And so because she didn't want to leave and or was afraid to leave, because that's one of the things that happens in these groups is, in many ways, single women become prisoners of the dynamic because they are so dependent on the survival and the support, and also so like incapable of getting out and doing anything, right? So my mom was in this bucket of just didn't really have any other choices, which I now understand.
It's not much different than abuse victims or a spouse that stays in an abusive relationship because I'm saying she because most likely it's...
No, it's totally true. And I've shared many times as I've, again, gained perspective on that, and the areas I'll share that my relationship with my mom was heartbreaking and torn apart. As I worked on a lot of forgiveness and things that would come later, you start to understand what abuse does to people. And I think people who aren't abused don't understand the dynamics of why people don't leave. They don't understand the dynamics of why people would give away their power. And what they don't understand is that especially when you're a child, if you're abused as a child, you don't stop loving the abuser, you stop loving yourself. Because it is much easier to frame a story that you are still safe than it is to have an idea that this person who's borderline omnipotent is actually not so good for you. So what happens to someone's brain when they are forced to rewire their neurosynapses to accept abuse, whether that is physical, emotional, mental, sexual, doesn't matter, is like a type of thing that I think people who aren't abused like don't fully understand. And then when you go to a cult dynamic where every adult is actually a child, because the leaders of the collective are parents. And so now imagine every adult is basically a child being abused, sometimes overtly, sometimes covertly with manipulation tactics. It is a lot easier to believe that it's your faith that's the problem, that if you just adhere yourself even more to the principles of the teaching, it will be better. Or, hey, like you deserve this because you did something wrong, whether it was this lifetime or the next, right? And so you have this like dynamic where I think people don't realize the reason there's so many buy-ins by people in a collective is because the amount of times they are re-signing a covert contract to agree to abuse by the leader, the more times you sign a covert contract, the harder it is to break. And so every time something bad happens and you believe it's your fault, anytime you're abused and it's your fault, it's very difficult to suddenly wake up and come to terms with what's really going on, right? What you're more likely to do, and this is what I share about in my story, you're more likely to take that abuse on others. That's actually the more likely thing that happens than you are to actually have the ability to stand up and do something different. So back to the story I wanted to tell, because I cut it from my book, but you reminded me of it, is not only was that kind of an insane dynamic that I didn't know yet and that it was put on me in that way, but it immediately created this tension between me and my stepbrother. So Marlo, the 19-year-old that my dad married, she had a baby young, very young, with someone who left the collective. So I think she was pregnant with Dallas at 16. She had a baby. This was common for the collective to have kids that young. And other things we can get into, but Dallas was Marlo's biological kid from a different man who became my father's oldest son when he remarried. And Dallas was my dad's spiritual son, according to the teaching, right? So I wasn't, he was. And so the moment I knew, what was interesting is like, I was at the bottom of the totem pole, but there instantly became this like rivalry and tension between me and Dallas, not even in any way that I was looking for, but it was almost like imposed on us. Like we were two kids who were put in this weird dynamic of everyone was always comparing us to each other. And so one of the things that I come from the book was like, I remember the first time I was 11 years old walking, I was 10 years old, Dallas was 11. I was on a walk with Dallas, and this is the conversation between a 10 and an 11-year-old. Like, hey man, I know we have a lot of spiritual pressure on us right now, and the tension has become too much. So this is Dallas talking to me. I need you to know that Steve Rensch is not your father. And if you ever claim him as your spiritual father, like, I'll kill you. I'll kick you out of my family. Like, you can't do that. And I'm saying, hey man, thank you for sharing this with me. I agree with you. He's not my spiritual dad. I'm not looking to claim it either. I love you, and I'm really glad that we've talked about this. And he's like, hey, I'm going to pursue my purpose as basketball because everyone is seeing that you're getting super talented at chess, and you should pursue your purpose in chess so that we don't have to have tension with each other. This is an 11 and a 10-year-old on a walk. And you know what? It was a good talk. Like, we were all in on this because it was like a healthy thing for us to be able to have like the perspective to articulate based on the framework we were giving, this larger spiritual teaching that spiritual blood is more important than worldly blood. And here we were, because we had spent the last year at each other's throats, agreeing that I was not going to pursue his family because I didn't ever want his dad to be my spiritual dad anyway, which was actually fine with me. I didn't care. And he was going to pursue basketball instead of chess so that we didn't have competition in chess. Like, how fucking wild is that, right?
It's a pretty mature conversation.
I cut that whole story from the book because we had to make cuts here and there. But I just wanted to tell you that. We can get back to the thing, but that's a wild story.
So where does chess come into play? So what age?
Okay, so that was how we got to this tangent, because you asked, when did I first get to know my father? And that spiritual warrior conversation from my dad happened at a hotel room in Peoria, Illinois, before the National Elementary Championship, which I would go on to win. So to back up, how I got super good at chess and how we got there also goes back to Dallas, which is the summer of 1995. I'm 9. I turned 10 in October. I'm about to be 40, by the way. Turning 40 here this week.
Congrats.
Thank you. The summer of 1995, We understand how we got here. I'm just a village kid. We're doing things. The movie Searching for Bobby Fischer comes out on HBO. We had 8 channels in the village. We all just had local TV. We had a spin one, which was great. 8 was PBS, 7 was HBO. Saturday night HBO movie night is like the big purple letters and whatever movie is they're premiering. And it was Searching for Bobby Fischer. So I watched this movie. What's funny is Dallas also watched this movie at his house. And for whatever reason, like, we were just obsessed. It was magical. The idea that we could play chess and be good at it, like all the scenes in the park with the hustlers and the moving fast. Yeah. I think it was like, I actually think there was a weird sex appeal we had that the movie made chess cool to us. Chess was a thing that maybe we kind of knew of. I think a lot of people, if you show them a chess set, they go, oh, I know that game or whatever, right? So we were kind of in that lane, had no idea how to play or really what it was about. And here was this movie where this like kid magically discovers he's a child prodigy while playing with drug addicts, hustlers in the park, right? And I think we were obsessed with this. So we actually, we had one of those black and red folding boards you get from Walmart with the plastic pieces. And we set up like a fake book for a clock. And Dallas and I, without even really knowing how to play, would like pretend like we were playing fast chess. That's what we called it, just fast chess. We didn't know that it was called blitz or whatever. And so from that summer, discovering the game from the movie, the other thing that happened that was sort of, I guess, uniquely lucky at the time. Well, there were 2 other things. There was a trifecta. And I think sometimes when people share stories of, you ask like, why are people who drop out of high school great? There's obviously a lot of statistics that would say whatever, right? So I'm not going to say that. But I think there's usually a story of things that converged at the same time. It was less of a lightning in a bottle that you dropped out of high school, but it was the fact that you made that choice while these other things that were happening that you either had the presence of mind of or got lucky with. And with us, there were 2 other crazy things that summer. The first one is the collective was under attack. There were bodyguards everywhere because everyone in the local area of Payson had decided we were a cult. Now, again, I would take many years to acknowledge that we were a cult, but we weren't the type of cult they were saying.
This is in the wake of Waco, which
exactly.
wasn't
exactly. Cults
but a few
were crazy
years before that. Yeah.
In the 90s. No, thank you for saying that. Because one of the reasons I spent so many years thinking we weren't a cult is because as a kid, I saw the videos of the houses burning in Waco long before I should have. I saw rated R stuff. I was literally brainwashed to say, hey, you see that? We're not that. You see Jonestown? I was an 8-year-old who knew what drinking the Kool-Aid meant, literally meant, right? I was shown or educated on Heaven's Gate. One people didn't know about, there was mass suicide there, right? So all of us in our generation were educated, or you could say brainwashed, to make sure we knew why we weren't those. We were not that cult. We did not practice polygamy. There was no sacrifices being made. There was no mass suicide agenda. And because all of those things were true, there weren't any of those things. When we started coming under attack by like local groups of basically they were rednecks, to be honest with you, like it was just bullshit. Like they were running us, like me and some of my friends were run off the road. We were called freaks. Like they like tried to hit us. There were threats of violence. People would show up at the collective school with guns and threaten to kill people. And so the threat of violence was very real, combined with this emboldened sort of feeling we all had of like, we don't deserve this, right? Regardless of the fucked up shit that was happening, and there was a lot more fucked up shit to come, we were not doing these things and we didn't deserve this. And so what happened was Stephen and Trina hired a bunch of bodyguards. By the way, none of this is in the book too. So anyone's read it, they're going to look. This is all behind the scenes stuff right now. In fact, when I was watching Searching for Bobby Fischer as a 9-year-old kid, I remember looking over and watching Scott the bodyguard, like running to Stephen and Trina's house because something was happening. I don't know. And so here I am, like no shoes, watching Searching for Bobby Fischer. There's bodyguards. I've been dealing with this for a month. But because the bodyguards were there and because of all the threats, we weren't allowed to play outside. So here now we discover chess in a summer where we're under attack and there's bodyguards with nothing else to do but play chess. And then the third magical thing that happened that sort of pushed this cart down the trail for me that would become chess is it was the summer of Garry Kasparov versus Viswanathan Anand, which was the World Chess Championship. There's a World Chess Championship every 2 years, but that was big because it was the first World Championship held in U.S. soil in decades. It was being held in New York. So anyone who looks that up will remember that it started in like September, and it was a big deal because normally chess doesn't get mainstream media coverage, but that summer there was mainstream media coverage of the World Championship. So Dallas and I had this like limited, we weren't allowed to go outside. When we did, we would have to run to each other's house to play because you weren't allowed to be outside for long because it was safety. We discovered the game because of Searching for Bobby Fischer. And now we have this like mainstream media coverage of something that was like, we're like, holy shit, like chess is fucking cool, right? And so I honestly don't go into it in that detail, so I'm really glad you asked. But like, I really credit that it was like a weird combination of trauma and opportunity combined with this like belief that there was like this magical thing that we could be chess prodigies. And then enters Stephen Camp. He's the leader of the collective. And the most important thing that pushed everything over the line was that Stephen Camp, regardless of his faults and the fact that he was the leader of the cult, genuinely loved chess.
Okay.
And so I know I just went along. It's just too much.
No. I was
for crowd, they're like, God, this guy needs to shut up.
You were absent education on the game.
Yes.
But you're answering it.
Yeah. So Stephen Camp is obsessed with chess, and he wants us to play. And so here come me and Dallas playing chess without a lot of other things to do, not even allowed to do other things. And he really encouraged it. He was fascinated with the fact that we were fascinated. He was already covering or following the Kasparov-Anand championship match. And then he takes us to our first tournament in October of that year. I actually did horrible. Dallas did really well, but it didn't matter. The short story is over the next 2 years, like we would go from 0 to like 60, and we would just become some of the best chess players in the country for our age. I actually became an All-American very fast. I was one of the top rated players in the world. And now to Peoria, Illinois, our team is one of the best scholastic teams in the world. We're competing for a national championship. We would actually win that year by a record 2.5 points at the time. This school of cult kids had become just absolutely crazy good. And here comes my first ever real conversation with my father, which is how we got here. So he called me into the bathroom where he was shaving. My dad always had a big mustache, so he's shaving everything but his mustache. And I share this in the book, but it was one of the scariest things for any kid to be called by Steve Rensch. It was scary because of who he was. Mm-hmm. He never called you in lightly, right? There was always something heavy to say. But also the fact that I was now 12, I was aware that this guy was my dad. I had had a few years for this whole thing to marinate. I mean, maybe with time, I would say I was already kind of aware that something was a little bit odd about this dynamic, all those things. And I go to have a conversation with him, and he tells me, he says, I was number 3 going into the tournament. The expectation was that I should be winning the national championship. And at this point, the expectation on me to win is like more than just chess. It's like part of the spiritual mission of the collective that we're going to be winning chess games. And he calls me in and he's like, Danny, I know you have a lot of pressure on you, and there's going to be opportunities where you win to get in your ego. And I'm going to tell you that nothing you're doing is about you. It's about God. And you have to find the right zone between doing your best and giving the expectations to God, because it's not actually up to you what happens with anything. And so the zone is to find the right reasons to do it, which is focus on what you can control and don't focus on things that you can't control. And the last thing is, it doesn't help the rest of the team if you gloat when you win. Your job, just because you're a good chess player, doesn't make you a good leader. The job of a good leader is to make sure everyone else feels supported around them. And so you are here to have a job. You're on a mission for God, but don't get in your ego about it, and don't celebrate your victories in front of the other team, because they're not you. They need you to like be supportive of them. And ultimately, it was actually a great pep talk. It was probably exactly what I needed to hear going in, because there was a huge part of me that was very focused on the result. I was nervous. I had tons of pressure on me. And he gave me a pep talk that was a bit of a bubble popper. And it was like, hey, like, don't think you're king shed. Focus on what you can control. And that'll be the thing that actually gets you what you want. And as awkward as it was, and as intense as it was, and as much as those are some words and language framing that might be, maybe you could say it a little better to a 12-year-old, it actually was probably not just an important conversation, but probably describes what my relationship has been with my father for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Sage advice, wise words.
Yeah.
I want to jump forward.
Yeah.
So you finally leave the collective one at age...
Yeah. Sorry, I jumped across to that. So the collective imploded. I left it.
Wait, the collective imploded. People are leaving left and right.
Yeah, people are leaving left and right. A lot of what tears these groups apart in the end is sort of similar when it comes to money and opportunity. just as I've learned about other groups as well, like people who have kids within the collective, they came there on a mission, but your kids didn't choose it. Yeah. Ultimately, you end up in a spot where they're looking for something different. And there ends up, that combined with one other thing, which is people start inheriting money from their parents who are dying. So usually what ends up tearing a lot of things apart is money, right? You have people who are no longer into communism when they're inheriting $2 million from their dead dad, right? That's something that happens, as well as the fact that you have kids who want to pursue different opportunities. And so without getting into the details, I would say that the peak of the collective was probably around this time of the talk with my dad, around the age of 12. Mm-hmm. It was about 300 people. I would argue that at that time, more people were bought in on the mission than not. Over the next 10 years to the age of 22, you would see things completely implode, not just internally within the camp family, the children turning on the parents and money and all kinds of, just dynamics that were going down, but a lot of other people leaving. For me, the story is more complicated than that, but ultimately, I wouldn't argue that I left the collective until I was, maybe until I was almost starting this book 5 years ago, which is wild. Now, what I would say is the collective was not what you think it was. I was living in the eye of a hurricane that was killing itself. It was destroying itself, right? So I know I've already gone on a tangent enough, but I need to tell you about my relationship with my mom.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's how we get there. So what ends up happening is I'm now a great chess player. I win the national championship.
At 14, you're at
12, I win this national championship. I became the youngest master in Arizona at the age of 14.
So you're in the press at this time as well.
Yes.
Your profile's being built.
Yep. But what isn't known to the rest of the world, so I'm an All-American in the public eye, and I'm known as Danny Gordon. What isn't known is that I'm living in this collective where the pressure on me to perform is literally spiritually ordained from not just the spirit who was speaking through Trina, but by Stephen Camp, who was obsessed with chess. And very quickly, what became something of Steve Rensch is not your spiritual father. You're not supposed to have a relationship with him. Because he was actually closer to Stephen Camp and they worked together on what people did, it became something where actually your mom and Dennis are the ones who may not be up to snuff to helping you become the world chess champion. And don't we all agree that our spiritual purpose is more important than biology? Yes, that's why we're here, right? And your spiritual purpose is the most important reason you're on the planet. So over the age of 12 to 13, I was taken from my mother. And not just taken in that I was go have a spend the night. It first started with, he moved me in with different families, Stephen Camp did, to make sure, to kind of separate me from needing to be with my mom. All kinds of crazy stuff happened during that time. I was super sick one winter and wanted to go home, but they said I was making up the sickness because I missed my mommy, and which of course now I know would have been okay. But it was all these things to put me in a spot where I was isolated, which in turn meant that the most important and consistent relationship I had was actually Stephen Camp. And so at the age of 13, he pulled the ripcord and I was taken away from my mother and moved alone to live in the valley, which is what we called it. The valley had a couple of homes that the people in the village would go.
So you're not seeing your mom every day.
So now I'm literally taken from my mom at the age of 13, and I didn't heal this relationship with my mom till I was 23. It would be 10 years before my mom and I would actually come back together. And we still lived in the collective the whole time. And this is what people outside don't understand. How could that fucking happen, right? How could you, one, if you're a mom, how could you let your kid be taken? But secondly, how could everybody be complicit with what was going down? And that is mostly what I tell in my book, is that basically what was required as a belief system in regards of the spiritual reason we're all here, combined with the logistics of being. What was sold to the collective was that I was being moved in with my dad in Marlow, and that it was time for me to learn from my dad. I had spent the first 13 years with my mom. Don't you think your dad deserves a chance? But in reality, I was actually moved and lived alone in the valley. Stephen Camp was my parent and overseer of all things. I was basically a professional chess player at that age and already not doing school. And my relationship with my mom and Josh and Dennis was completely cut off. And I would spend the next years of adolescence, the rest of the world knowing me as a professional chess,
prodigy.
superstar. And at home, I would come home and we were still financially merged. Meaning the collective was, I was basically a collective orphan, for lack of a better way to put it. And that was the game until I met my wife, really. And that's really what the beginning of what I would say the end of my experience of the collective was.
And your wife was in the collective at the time as well?
Yes.
Okay, and how old are you at the time that you met her?
So we first met when I was 4 and she was 6. That doesn't really count because what happened in her family was her dad also left her mom and married the second oldest daughter of Stephen and Trina, who was also significantly younger. But unlike my mom, Kathy, Shauna's mom, didn't stick around. They literally fled and went back to Chicago to live with her family. So Kathy leaves with Shauna. My wife is Shauna. Kathy is Shauna's mom, and takes the kids back to the Chicago. I would never have known that I knew Shauna or Luke or her brother, whoever, until I got really good at chess. One of the things that happened when I was getting good at chess is we needed to travel, and I had to go compete in all these tournaments, the Chicago Open, every Memorial Day. So as a poor collective trying to support this kid who's pursuing this incredibly important spiritual mission, I stayed with like surrogate families all over the country, like because either they were former members of the collective who had maintained some relationship, or they were friends of a friend. It didn't matter, right? So I was all over the place, and I ended up seeing Shauna in Chicago starting from the age of 12 till I was 16 every year, probably multiple times a year. Then, because Shauna's family was falling apart, which is its own wild story, Kathy had remarried and that marriage wasn't going well. They ended up moving back to Arizona, despite all the things that had happened, because it was probably a better solution than her continuing to deal with this abusive marriage she was in. So she comes back, and that's when Shauna and I first start having a relationship. And to fast track that story, because we ended up deciding we wanted to be together, you weren't allowed to have sex and date unless you were getting married and on a life track. We went from having our first date to moving in together at the age of 17 and 19 within a month. And then I was proposing within a year at 18. We had our first kid when I was 19, and I turned 20 right before Nash was born, our oldest son, Nash. And so these things happen in back-to-back succession. And once I had a kid, it was a lot harder for my wife to accept what had happened with me and my mom. And so one of the things I'm forever grateful for is that Shauna came from such a broken situation back to the collective that I feel like she brought a perspective with her that was simultaneously, the world is fucked up. We do need more community. You need people there for each other, because I've seen what happens when you're living in upper middle class Chicago suburb and people are fucking lying and cheating on each other and there's drugs. And I'm not saying it's everywhere, but that was her life. So she witnessed that. So she's like, community is actually a good thing. But then she had enough perspective to come back and say, but say what? You were fucking taken from your mom at 12? What's your relationship with her now? And I would say things like, I love my mother, but I never want to speak to her again because she's not my spiritual mother. And Shauna would be like, well, that's fucked up. That's not going to fly, right? And so she was the first kind of linchpin in terms of not allowing me to continue to deny that this tragedy had happened. Am I talking too much?
No.
I'm just going for it. Okay.
Hey, that is the point.
Okay,
A good podcast is where the guest bestows his knowledge on us. So she's not necessarily bought into the collective. She understands the community part, but she's also an independent thinker.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, sort of sage counsel to you in changing perspectives. Okay, so now you guys are 22.
Yes, she's 22, I'm 20.
So she's a bit older.
She's 2 years older, yeah.
Well played.
Yeah.
Well played, 16 and 18-year-old. Yeah. That's awesome. And you're continuing with your competitions. You're still living in Arizona.
Yeah, in Arizona. Yeah,
in the Valley.
And so that's why I keep, and I think part of the reason we get in these kind of back and forth, we're sort of Tarantinoing the answer you keep coming to, which is, when did you leave the cult?
Which are the best movies, by the way.
Yeah, great movies. And it's funny, when I first started my book, working with the partners who were helping me and editors, I told them, I said, look, I'm not Will Smith. I'm not Barbara Streisand. No one's going to fucking buy my book because of my name. So I want this to be a good read. I want people to enjoy it. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I want this to read like a Tarantino movie, where you walk in and then it's like this and it's that. And so it's a page
future, past, future,
exactly.
past. Yeah.
So I hope we accomplish something that feels like an interesting read. But So to go back, the reason I keep kind of Tarantinoing the answer to this is because it's so hard to give the context of how were you slowly becoming aware that you were in a cult. Now I'm with my wife. She has some perspective, but also she's in the cult too. And make no mistake, it was still active. In fact, there were many times early on, every relationship that was together in the collective was only together if it was ordained by the collective. And so there were consistent threats of if you are not participating and or if you're not following enough spiritual practices, or if this isn't going well, you could be broken up. Because if the relationship isn't seen as a positive thing in terms of the teaching is the only reason we're on the planet, is to help bring the world this spiritual message. And so again, the weaponization of that whole thing made our relationship just as dependent on the cult while we saw it for what it was. So it's back to the abused child dynamic.
But you're playing the part.
You're playing the part, right?
To a sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're playing the part. There's a game that is required within that process, and you're sort of operating to the best of your ability with that while we have a kid, and I'm a 20-year-old, he's a 22-year-old. And what happens next is the reason we were then fast-tracked toward not just chess.com, but in many ways toward kind of our first real like war with the collective. And that was that when we got together, regardless of anything that happened till then, my relationship with my mom doesn't sit right with her, but there's only so much she can do. This whole lie that I'm a Rensch now because I've changed my last name and I'm a part of this family that isn't really my family. All of that stuff is being done under the auspices, or, it's being justified because I'm one of the best chess players in the world. I'm one of the top, I'm the highest rated player in the country for my age. I'm number 2 under 21 behind Hikaru Nakamura, who's now number 2 in the world, along with Magnus Carlsen. So I'm a top chess player in the world pursuing the idea that I'm going to be really, really great at this game. And then we're about a year and a half in, right before Nash is going to be born, and my ears explode. And you haven't noticed this. You can take a look here. This is the open skull spot where my Baja sits, which is an early cochlear implant, a bone anchor hearing aid. And I have 2 stapedectomies that were done. So a stapedectomy is where your stapes bone acts as a bit of a trampoline for the eardrum as sound comes in.
Yes.
My stapes bone had been completely eroded by growth and infection. During this time of being an orphan, if you will, in the valley, I did 2 things. I played chess and I swam all the time. And I swam a lot, not necessarily under parental supervision, while traveling a ton, planes and trains and automobiles, right? I was going everywhere. And I had been battling ear infections a lot. And I had kept these pretty much to myself because I didn't really have parents in that same way. And the idea was also that there was a very heavy-handed, like, I guess you could call it like a Christian Scientist sort of belief in that, like, every physical pain is a manifestation of something spiritual, which again, there's all kinds of modern progressive science where we can talk about how a good state of mind. I'm not dismissing this inherently, but what I am saying is that, again, you're faced with like, there's maybe some usefulness to consider something versus how it's weaponized and used, right? Because, for example, one of the things that I was told is that the reason my ears hurt is because I didn't want to hear something spiritually. But then I've read other spiritual gurus who say that if a child's ears ever hurt, it's because they're not being heard. So maybe that's what it should have been, right? I'm pointing out that there are different ways to view anything, even for those who are like, well, there's some truth to this. But the reality is I was a neglected kid who had massive ear infections. No one was dealing with it. And now I'm in a young relationship as a teenager, and I was flying back from the U.S. Junior Championship in Lynchburg, Kansas, and literally my ears, like,
from the pressure,
exploded from the pressure.
Oh, so you're sitting on a plane, ears explode.
Yeah.
And you're losing it.
And well, at this time I was in like so much pain. Like it literally went from, I know I have ear infections and like something's going on, to like, and like, just like a crack, like incredible pain, like knives stabbing inside your head and you can't get it out. Right. And I was dizzy, and it was literally the worst 3-hour plane flight you could possibly imagine from Lynchburg back to Phoenix, Sky Harbor. And I mean, at one point the flight attendant came over and she's like, she sees that I'm like bellied over and like I mouthed enough to like get some Advil. It didn't really help, but it was like something was wrong here. I get off the plane. There's also no cell phones really at this time either. So I get off the plane and I'm like stumbling my way to meet Shauna, who's picking me up. And it takes me getting in the car to kind of be like, I've lost my hearing. Like the world sounds like a tin can. Like I can hardly hear anything. It's like being underwater. and I'm in incredible pain, right? So this is all still why we're Tarantinoing the answers to these things, is because, which is kind of fun. Now I'm into the Tarantino part of the podcast. So we're getting on this track where if everything that had been done to this point, being taken from my mother, being orphaned and focused on chess, and now even the things I care about, allowed to be with this woman, Shauna, who I love and at this young age, is all okay with the leaders of the collective as long as I'm pursuing chess. Well, now my ears explode. And over the next 2 years, I was literally like bedridden. First, surgeries to kind of remove all the infection in the growth. Then it was the stapedectomies, which is where you artificially, that's why I was given the science lesson. Your stapes bone gets replaced by these like metal plastic pieces. Then I had the Baja, which is where they put the metal piece in my skull, which part of the reason I'm also so loud and probably the reason I project well is because I'm a very omni-deaf person, right? Now the stapedectomies have held up so well that I can hear naturally, and the Baja in my head, helps. And if I need to, I can always go back to a full cochlear implant. They can kind of reinsert it.
Yep.
But that was now my life. And over that period, not only had I completely failed in the spiritual mission of becoming a world chess champion, but I was now with a wife and a young baby and like needing to like figure out what we were going to do while I'm basically a bedridden surgery patient on Vicodin and Percocet, for 2 years.
Well, so that's not very Christian Science of you.
It's not very Christian Science of me, right?
No,
exactly.
Vicodin and
Percocet. Exactly. And that was really the beginning of other problems I was developing. And so this is what I share in the book, is that, you go from not just failing at this thing, but failing in terms of your entire like kind of spiritual self-worth and reason for being. And you're trying to make a young marriage work and now make money to raise a kid. I was teaching chess lessons. I could drive. I wasn't allowed to fly. I was literally grounded so professional chess was off the table, but I could teach chess. And when I was, I would have a surgery, be literally bedridden for 2 weeks, like just super heavy drugs, slowly get back. They're not even allowed to cut me open again for 6 months anyway. So I'm kind of doing life. Then another surgery would happen. So this was kind of the way it was going down for a couple of years. And during that time, two things happened that were, I guess, again, everything is on the same path, but the two things that happened that put me on a different wavelength than I was on was because I couldn't play and because I was in bed all the time. That was happening in 2004, 2005, 2006. This was the beginning of the internet as we know it now. When I say that to some people, they go, dude, the internet's been around since the 90s. And I'm like, no, I know that. What I'm saying is like the internet, I remember saying the phrase, what's YouTube? People would be like, watch this video. And I'm like, where can I see it? They're like, YouTube. I'm like, what's YouTube, right? That was a thing we all said. At one point, you also said, what's YouTube, right? And so YouTube was happening. MySpace was happening. The beginning of social media, right? This was a different time. And so I was bedridden during this time, spending a lot of time online. And I learned what made the internet tick. I took the whole Google AdWords course myself. I was learning back then you could say SEO and people didn't know what you meant, right? Like before it became what it was. So that became the biggest blessing in disguise, that I was actually at the core of understanding where this was going. And then because I was also forced with this other sort of necessity breeds genius trauma, which is I had to figure out my shit because I had a wife and a baby, there was a very interesting kind of framework of seeing the internet through the lens of what chess could become. Right. Because of what was happening with the world online, because of my lack of opportunities, I certainly wasn't able to play in any serious chess online, not like we've, been able to help create now. It sounds like a fucking magical story, but that's because I think a lot of trauma does have the potential for alchemy to happen. Like that was kind of what happened, right? It was like this transformation of my life falling apart, necessity that I have to figure this out. The internet is happening. And that was like the beginning of what would kind of get me on the path to chess.com. And I still haven't answered how the collective fell apart yet.
Nor how you reconnected with your mom.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. I don't know why I'm laughing about this. I feel bad. I feel like I've been rambling. But I love breaking the fourth wall with the audience. So I'm going to do my best to keep going. That is the point. Keep going.
Mom and then collective implosion.
Yeah. So, because we have a baby, and this is like not speaking for others in terms of what ultimately helps you get your shit in order, but for me, and I think for many people, when it comes to especially issues you've been neglecting, whether it's your own abuse, your own just character issues that start to come out because you see it a little bit more now that you have this little thing that you would never want the worst sides of you to be around, or whatever, anything in between. Nash was like simultaneously my wife being fed up with the damaged little boy in me, right? Because now she has her own little boy. And also there was a lot of pain that I had in having a baby because I had heard the many stories of my dad left my mom, and now I had been justified and told that it was for all these good spiritual reasons. And my dad had spent all these years, because I was orphaned, but also he was my new dad, whatever relationship we had developed, my dad had talked bad about my mom many, many times to me. So now I'm in this spot where like I have my own baby. I have no relationship with my mother, haven't for 10 years. It was all justified under the auspices of this spiritual mission that is now failing. And my wife is fed up with it. And I will not skip the rated R details. I will say these are in the book and people can read it, but I'm very honest and real about what an asshole I was at this time. Literally, the chapter 13 of the book is called "Why is Danny Rensch Such a Fucking Asshole?" Which is a funny story because I was literally called an asshole in those early years by my co-founders, Eric and Jay. That's why it's actually a direct quote from Eric, which is hilarious. But the double meaning of the chapter is that this was, I would argue, kind of the peak, almost destroyed my own life kind of behavior, right? I had gone from being on Vicodin and Percocet to abusing opioids behind my wife's back, Xanax and Klonopin. I was drinking a lot, drinking alcohol and opioids. It doesn't go well together. I was doing that. I was having massive panic attacks. The worst panic attack was one where I was actually behind the wheel of a car and like blacked out. Could have been 5 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. So this was like the heaviest time of our life. And now Shauna's pregnant with our second boy, Warner. And the combination of like being fed up with me and also fighting for my life. She's fed up with me and fighting for my life in that way. Like she leaves the valley to go back to the village because at this time, one of the craziest things about the collective is that because my dad had actually come into a lot of money, Steve and Marlo were now kind of on their own from Steven and Trina, and they didn't want to be a part of the collective anymore either because they had their own money. But they wanted to kind of start their own collective. It was like a very weird, like power inner dynamic going on. And so as crazy as it is to say that staying in the valley with my dad and Marlo was worse for Shauna than going back to Steven and Trina, like that's what it was. Like going back to Steven and Trina allowed her to be in her mom's house. Her mom had left this abusive marriage now, so she was in the collective. And it allowed her to get away from me and this sort of denial I had about my mom. And also, I don't know, how much this was premeditated by Shauna or not. I should ask my wife this. We've been together for, but my mom was also up there. And so I hadn't dealt with my mom now in 10 years, right? I'm 23 years old.
Your mom knows she's a grandmother at this point.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And there are other small, awkward, horrible stories within there, and they're in the book, and I'm only in the interest of sparing every detail for the reader or for the viewer, because I will go into all the tangents. There have been very awkward, like traumatic interactions, small interactions, but nothing that allowed us in any way to like talk. Like literally at one point, the longest stretch I went was 7 years. I didn't talk to her for 7 years. And so my wife moves to the village to kind of get away from this life that had been created. My dad, who would say himself was peak asshole at the time. He had come into money. Everything about our marriage was falling apart. She runs up to the village, and I basically, my hand was forced. I start commuting where I'm teaching lessons in the valley to make money, private schools and these sort of things. And then I'm going up north. But it's during this time where she's like, hey, like you've got to heal with your mother, basically, like you've got to figure this out. And while the collective had not fully imploded yet, I just gave the example of Steve and Marlo coming into their own money. There were other examples of this sort of happening. And so Steven and Trina were no longer two things that made the village safer for us. I would reflect here maybe for the first time is that one was it was away from Steve and Marlo, and at the time they were more controlling than anybody. The second thing was that because the collective was kind of imploding, we weren't really the priority necessarily. There was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of crazy shit going on in the community. And then really, I guess the third thing is that we were even less of a priority because I was no longer pursuing professional chess. Stephen Camp was less interested in me. In fact, in many ways, I brought the idea of chess.com and these things to my dad and Stephen Camp early on. And they basically like, one, they had no fucking clue what the internet was about to become. And they were, I think, like many of the men in the collective, but Steve Rensch and Stephen Camp for sure, it was like, if it's not coming from us, then it's like not the most spiritually righteous thing anyway, right? So it's like my dad's attitude toward like everything that didn't like come from him and Stephen Camp was like, don't cast your pearls before swine. Like you're the one going before God. You're this kind of, and so it's like dealing with white trash arrogance, right? It's like we're poor and things are falling apart, but we're also the most important fucking thing in the world, right? And so it's like you had that kind of dynamic, right? And so I was trying to make my marriage work while the beginning of chess.com was happening. And my mother was now, again, only a few hundred feet away. She wasn't a 2-hour drive away. In the other part of the collective, she was a few hundred feet away. And the interactions at first were very intense and awkward. I came home from chess lessons one time and she was there like playing with the boys. And I would like freak out, be like, why the fuck is my mom here? Like, what are you doing? I didn't call her my mom. It's Debbie. Like, why the fuck is Debbie here? And me and Shauna would start to have a fight and Debbie would leave. And then she would basically be like, hey, like, I didn't know you were going to be home. And she's fine with the kids. And like, she was always calming me down because at this time too, like I hated my mom because she had let me go in my mind. In my mind, I wasn't taken. She had allowed the whole thing to happen. And not only that, I had then been brainwashed to believe that anything that had gone wrong in my life was really like her fault.
A little bit of a parental alienation by the part of your dad.
100%, right?
In the community. Got it.
Total parental alienation. And then when the ear surgeries happened, they blamed it on my mom. They're like, oh, well, this neglect must have started way before you were our kid, way before you were like a teenager, which really wasn't true. And so, but I carried a level of like rage toward my mother and some of it being righteous because I was a heartbroken little kid. And regardless of the cult dynamic, like she let me go. Like, and why did this happen? Right. So here I am, this like, alcohol, opioid abusing asshole who's also just a wounded little kid and doesn't want to deal with this shit with his mom, and the TLDR of that time was Shauna basically was relentless. Like she wouldn't let me off the hook in terms of creating space to either talk about it, whether that night of talking led to me being drunk and enraged, or whether that night of talking led to me crying. All things happened, but slowly it was like this sort of healing had begun that I was no longer gonna run from this situation. And I think the ultimate healing really happened when Shauna pushed me to write a letter to my mom, who had already been dealing with some enough, and writing a letter, even though you live next to someone, can be very, healthy and therapeutic. And so I wrote the most scathing letter to my mom in this, from the perspective of how the fuck could you have let this happen? You have no idea what an asshole I've become. I'm a heartbroken, abused, fucking prick. And the reason I'm this way is because you let me go. And like everything bad that happened to me is your fault. Everything that happened with my ear surgeries, everything that is my being, and the fact that I'm struggling to be a good father and a good husband. I gave her everything. And then the craziest thing is she said, I'm sorry. She said, you're right. It was my fault.
Sounds like a little bit of a victim mentality.
It was total victim mentality. Yeah. I was so enraged and so not doing well and still struggling with so much victim mentality about the fact that my life didn't work out, right? And it didn't happen the way I thought it was supposed to. And then the part of me that was looking to, I was trying to do what I could. It was self-imposed therapy. It was my wife and I doing what we could to be like, well, this seems like a healthy thing to do next, right? So I was just taking the next step of what I thought would be the right thing to do. And the truth is, when my mom met my rage, my heartbreak, and my victim mentality with taking full responsibility for everything, it was like you're standing ready for battle and someone like drops all their weapons, and it was like, okay. And when she did that, it changed everything.
Pick those back up. Yeah, you won the fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally disarmed you.
100%. So she not only said, I'm sorry, but she wrote the kind of letter that like breaks your heart and took responsibility for everything. I do. Yeah. Yellow legal pad in my mom's handwriting. And so now we're going to get to the tragic ending of, well, this, the story itself obviously is its own tragedy, but the tragic ending is that I would spend the next 2 years healing with my mother, sparing all the bloody fights, because what matters is that my mom literally healed everything about our relationship and ultimately saved my marriage in the process. I mean, everything that happened over that time was like, when you're dealing with someone who shows you like that level of like just forgiveness and kindness and all the things that she did that I think many people talk about, like, oh, like take the high road, but this doesn't even like describe what she did, right? She took responsibility for things that couldn't have possibly been her fault. And when she did that, it saved a lot of things and healed our relationship, ultimately saved my marriage. And then she had a massive stroke when I was 26. And so I had only just gotten her really back into my life, and she had a subdural hematoma, which is more than a quarter size brain bleed. And she didn't die right away, but basically did. And so now I'm at the age of 28, and the mother who I never had is dead and gone. And so to get to the final answer of like what happened with the collective, I think, we all like do the thing we do. In some areas, we're looking the other way. We're justifying hypocrisy. We're judging ourselves when things aren't going well for whatever the faith in the tragedy is. But regardless of everything that had been happening around, there were still enough people in the collective. There was this idea that like, when shit hits the fan, at least people will be there for each other, right? And what I saw was a lot of people who were addicted to drama, but didn't actually know how to deal with real trauma, right? Which rhymes for a reason. It was like, that was in my face. It was like, oh, like now my mom has had a massive stroke. Everybody and their cousin wants to have an opinion about it. Like when you're a young person and you find yourself like counseling others through their grief, it was just like everything about how that went down, I think was like the final straw that broke the camel's back in terms of perspective, that this was actually not maybe ever what I thought it was. And not to say that I tell my story now and people go, well, like, you don't need to justify that it was a cult. I mean, you were literally fucking taken from your mother. There are so many, and this is just my story. Other people have their own. But I think like the part of me that wanted to believe there was something good and that there was going to be people there for you when you needed it, that was all sort of like turned upside down when my mom had a stroke. And obviously I can list the several, or a couple hundred people that were in and out of the collective at different times. And those out there who know that they don't necessarily apply to this and had a different relationship, they know who they are. But for the most part, it was like nobody was there. And I instantly went from being back in my mother's life, who I hadn't really seen, to like being her conservator, to like taking care of all kinds of like medical debt and just like every fucking thing that happened that could have happened. I literally saw the inside track of what is broken about our fucking health system. I will tell you that. I mean, going in and out of like nursing homes and seeing just what can happen in that world. And again, it's not even a thing you can unpack, but it was so eye-opening, and the lack of support we had from the collective really was sort of the deal breaker. And unfortunately, or fortunately, the things that happened right around that time too would forever change the trajectory of our business. So you had personal life going like this, and chess.com just starts going like this.
What age did you start chess.com?
So 23 was when I first joined so Eric and Jay are my co-founders, and I first met them at 23, back when Shauna was pregnant with our second kid.
You met them at a tournament?
Yeah.
You met them, okay.
Yeah, at a tournament. They were actually coming to recruit chess players, and I was there playing. One of the first tournaments I had played post-ear surgeries.
Recruiting for a platform, an idea they had to take this online.
Yep.
You said, I want in as a founder.
Yeah.
So the three of you.
Yes. And again, it was a wild ride to start. The TLDR is, again, we didn't get along a lot at first. Like I said, there's the chapter, why was Danny Rensch such a fucking asshole, for a reason. Again, it's kind of a joke because I wasn't really an asshole. I was a passionate, at least in this lane, I was an asshole at home, and I was struggling with all of my pain that was starting to come out sideways, right? When, everything, my wife likes to say, everything comes out. You decide if it comes out straight or sideways. That's her favorite phrase. So everything that was in my life was coming out sideways in the form of addiction and being a jerk. But when it came to chess.com, it was unique because I knew what it could be. So part of the reason I was an asshole is because I was sweaty. I was hungry. I was like, you have no fucking idea how broken my life actually is, right?
Your bar was up.
My bar was high, right, in terms of my expectation. In fact, Eric and I had a ton of back and forth initially, where that was what led to him turning to Jay and going like, why is Danny such a fucking asshole? Because I wanted more equity. I wanted more opportunity. I wanted more influence. And luckily I didn't like negotiate myself fully out of like a spot because I wanted in. And I was also probably even more ambitious than they were. I think what they would acknowledge now is that, I say think just because I'm, but they have acknowledged many times, is like, Eric's initial vision was that chess could be that chess.com would be the MySpace of chess, which was a fancy way of saying it'll just be like a social network for people to connect to. Everyone will have their own email. Remember, everyone had like an email at MySpace, right? And there was even initial ideas of like who would be the Tom of chess.com, the MySpace Tom. While Eric came with a vision of a lot of things that were bad about chess, so I'm not underselling that, and I had my own vision of all the things about the chess world that needed to change.
And you are by far the best chess player of the three of you.
Yes, by far, by far. They're neither of them are close to that. I think what I had was like call it delusional or not, I had an experience that gave me a level of ambition that nobody else had, right? I had this ear surgery experience. I had this brokenhearted, never going to be world chess champion anymore, child prodigy running inside of me. I had the anger fueling me of my relationship with my father and all this shit. And I think I was overwhelming for them. I was an asshole because I was like, hey, like this could be a lot more than the MySpace of chess, right? And so I think what they would say is that, yes, there's the joking story we like to tell now where we butted heads early on, but it was also very real because I was a little bit of a nut. Like I wanted the chess world that we now have now.
Well, let's break that down for a second. First off, ambition is not a bad thing. Yeah. I would rather have somebody with ambition than no drive at all.
Yeah.
Ambition equals drive. Bottom line.
Totally agree.
Most of the time. Two interdependent attributes, but usually highly linked. But I love how people naturally, hey, we do it. We size people up of, hey, this guy's an asshole or this gal's an asshole. And very few people have the ability to step back and say, no, yeah, their approach is very direct and to the point. But that's actually authentic to who they are. And it's tied to their ambition. And they have very high expectations and they want to go very far. I haven't met an entrepreneur who's been highly successful. And I think I read you guys are at 100 million plus in revenue a year.
Yeah.
20 million chess matches per day plus.
Yeah.
That's insane. But I still have not met anyone who's been wildly successful that isn't a bit of a asshole, that isn't wildly ambitious. And you've got to have that in order to break the mold. If not, if you're going to be the nice guy, if you're going to play it, you're going to let people have low, or you're going to have low expectations of standards.
Yeah.
And high-performing teams don't run that way. They don't run that way. But it sounds like you and the three founders are still together.
So Jay is not.
Jay is not.
Jay left early on. Yeah, so Jay is gone, and Eric and I have been... Jay left almost about 10 years ago. So it's been Eric and I running the ship together, yeah.
Difference of opinion or another opportunity, wasn't as passionate about the...
It was difference of opinion between him and Eric, particularly. We had gone through a nightmare of a technical rewrite at the time. This is 2016, so yeah, it's almost 10 years. And a lot of money was lost on the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And that happens. And the wrong decision is sometimes not clear until you're fucking millions of dollars deep in writing code that is no longer the right language to support the future of chess. And that always sounds, people go, oh, that's tech speak. But it really matters to make the right bet when you're scaling to 20 million games a day.
And you're going to make wrong decisions.
Yeah.
Because you guys are making assumptions of where the trends are going. And that, if I had a time for the amount of money I lost on things that we thought would be big that weren't.
Yeah.
I mean, I could keep you here for days too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But much like this, with Jay deciding to leave, do you guys still talk to
great
Jay?
Relationship. Yeah.
Okay.
Jay and I had, all good terms.
Amicable.
Yeah. Amicable terms. And, Eric and Jay have different sides of the story. And I'm not even passing the buck because it was one of those dynamics where if there was a triple-headed monster that was our relationship, Eric oversaw the product itself, like, the app suite, what we're doing on a business level ultimately rolled up to him. He is the CEO, but I was the CCO, so Chief Chess Officer or Content, and Jay was the CTO. When it came to the engineering roadmap, the tech team, this was Jay's lane, and I'm more the guy overseeing the business of chess, right? When it came to the things that would become what we are now in many ways, and so it's true that the particular battle between them wasn't really my domain. That's, without even like punting on it, that's just the truth. And they would both have their own side of that story, but it is very amicable. And the truth is everyone's done well. So, and what was born out of the original, like literal blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, like everybody is on the same page that like what you have is like fucking incredible now. And so nobody looks at it with like, with spite in that way.
You guys also acquired Chessable, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Outside funding?
No, we've never taken outside funding.
So you've leveraged yourselves out, especially when you did an acquisition.
Yeah, well, okay. So when the acquisition happened, we already had a private equity partner in General Atlantic. And so there is the larger mechanism that is the machine that we so there is
you took it as debt.
Yes. There is debt, and there is, not what people would think, though, because the reason I clarify is because we were bootstrapped and because there was no VC money initially. We went from, being laughed out of anybody saying chess will never be big to like overnight, the pandemic happens, the Queen's Gambit on Netflix happens, and people are like, oh, fuck, we missed on chess, right? And so overnight.
Great series, by the way.
Great series,
really,
right?
Really fucked up lady.
It was totally fucked up, right? And again, like I relate to the story. And so, and the chess world has a lot of stuff like that. When you have a world that is so egocentric and so also requires a level of self-reflection, that's one of the things that's great about the game is like there is no game that is more intimate and that like when you lose, it is on you. There is no team sport here. There's no fucking ref to blame. So it's a very lonely space, right? Yeah. And so that is depicted so well in the Queen's Gambit, and a lot of chess players.
And when you're in a lonely space, there are still voices.
Yeah.
The two voices in your head, of positive and one of negativity.
Yep.
And those are the most powerful voices in your life. And you can spiral.
Yeah.
You can spiral.
Hey, amen. Preach. No, you're right. I know. I think that show does a really good job with that. And I think that's one of the reasons it hit home. But back to the story of being laughed out of VCs, boardrooms to being what you can count on one hand. I don't know how many bootstrap unicorns there are out there, but we're one of them, right? And it's amazing.
And so you guys are hitting Sand Hill Road and Palo Alto trying to...
And so at that time, Eric did most of that. The only money we borrowed was $70,000 from a friend's mom, and Eric paid it back very quickly. So literally. So there was no funding. And so when we eventually, like I said, got big enough as a bootstrapped, crazy success story, and General Atlantic came in as the largest shareholder, we now have a more traditional kind of structure where there is some debt and there are the things, but yeah, that's how we got there.
I want to get back to the life story, but I've got to ask this. So with chess.com, I mean, is the ultimate goal to eventually sell to the right platform?
Honestly, we don't know.
Are you guys still having fun?
We are still having fun, but if we're honest, which is what this is all about, like there's a little bit of we used to answer the question of what's the end game with like, go fuck yourself. There is no end game. This is not just the most fun thing in the world, but we don't answer to you because remember, you laughed us out of the investment room. Yeah. So we get to say, go fuck yourself because it's our show. We don't have to have an end game. And we would literally give that answer to anybody. Now you have investors, we don't get to give that answer, right? And so everything is being discussed, right? Whether that's an IPO, whether that's finding the right evergreen kind of partner, which we're very picky about. Not just from we don't want to sell to someone who doesn't give a shit about chess, but we don't want to sell to someone who doesn't care about the unique kind of thing we have. So we are considering all the things. Yeah.
And if you guys haven't been to chess.com, go, because even if you want to learn the game, there's platforms to teach you. There's coach player options. There's just playing other players. Are most of the top players on the platform?
Yes, all of them are.
So are you having like savant chess matches that people like pipe in to watch?
No, we all the time. Yeah, it's crazy.
And do you guys advertise those, or is it just people know where to go find them?
Yeah, people do. I mean, if you you go to chess.com right now, there is a game going down between two of the best chess players in the world 24/7. And I think even a more amazing thing is that what we've done is like, and when I say we, the internet did this for us, but we capitalized and created the space, which is that if you're a young kid growing up and you weren't growing up in a former state of the Soviet Union or like New York with the Marshall Chess Club, you were growing up in Austin, there was no fucking chess scene for you, like not very long ago, right? And so if you didn't have a local environment of support, the idea that you would become the next Magnus Carlsen was crazy. Like, you can't become the next great chess player. That has completely changed. I mean, you now have talent popping up from everywhere, the most remote places in the world, because imagine if you could play Roger Federer tennis in your backyard, right? That's what these kids have with Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura and every other top player in the world available. And that's what they're doing. They're playing chess.
You guys have almost democratized.
Yeah, we have
chess.
No, I think I agree with that. And I think that's one of the things we're most proud of, is that there is a real meritocracy where there didn't used to be one. And again, I think any world when you get to the top would not pretend that it's a pure meritocracy, because you have those who are the most talented achievers. And that is the world we live in, right? At the same time, there was zero opportunities, not just for the, ear surgeried Vicodin of Danny Rensch, but anybody else, right? There was nothing that allowed for someone to go from the bottom to the top, right? And now there really is. And I think that part of it has changed just everything. Yeah.
So you're starting to recover around 28. Life is somewhat, you're maturing.
Well, I would say even 26 before my mom had her stroke. Like, I'm doing well.
I'm doing well. Alcohol?
Still drinking,
opiates.
But no drugs, no opioids.
Are you drinking now?
I drink a little bit, but casually. Socially?
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's not a problem in that way. And I think I would describe myself as like, I'm very careful to use the term like addict language, because I would say alcohol was being abused. I was self-deprecating with whatever thing I could get my hand on, versus actually being an addict at the time. And again, there are all types of terminologies, and there are different reasons different people sit on different sides of the fence on this stuff. I will not deny that that's like who I was. And what's funny is I think my relationship with alcohol will be on the table for discussion for the rest of my life. Because whenever you're in a period where you abuse it to that level, and you were like, my therapist says this, which is like two things, which is one, forget all the other bullshit definitions of whatever. Not to say they're bullshit, but there are different frameworks that help different people. But one of them was like, do you change your moral compass when you're under the influence of alcohol?
100%. That's not even up for debate.
But I think there's a level of like, how often the next day are you like, I wouldn't have done that, versus like, okay, I was a little more like loose in my thinking, versus like, that's behavior that I literally wouldn't do. I think there is like a difference in line. And I think that I am in a place now where that is not the case, right? Yeah. If I have a drink socially, like, it doesn't affect who I am. And I also don't crave it in the same way that I used to. And because partly I've done a lot of work on.
Because you don't need to numb yourself. You don't need to numb reality. Yeah. I only had one period in my life. Yeah, we drank in the military heavily, and that was just with the boys. And it was in a social setting, but we would binge drink, and we would get shit faced, and we would have fun together, and that's bonding. But you talked about lonely. I left a very unique place in the military where we were the easy button for a lot of things. Ended up in Austin. Yeah, going through the MBA program. 2 years left in the military, and bro, I started abusing alcohol bad. And if I could have used opiates, which I would have popped on a piss test and I would have lost my retirement. Yeah. I probably would have. Yeah. But basically didn't have my teammates around me. Yeah, I met people in Austin. It's, men especially are not built to be alone. Yeah. We crave community. And you said your wife's name is Sasha. Shauna. Yeah. She's right. There is no sense of community. Yeah. Everyone is just out for themselves now. And so interesting, but I don't touch alcohol anymore. I mean, I will occasionally have a drink if it's, with my teammates here at the company we work with, and everyone's trying to get to know each other. But like, I just have no desire for a drink. Yeah. And not only that, from a health perspective, I mean, you can make the case, as we all know that, but nobody should. Sleep. Yeah. It throws off your REM so badly. Yep. And I would just not sleep well, and I got sleep apnea. So,
well, and I'll say this real quick, because I appreciate opening up about this stuff, and not just for myself, but if it helps any others, I'll say one of the breakthroughs that I have for me, I am way more in the lane now where I not only do I not crave it, I rarely drink. I think the last drink I had was 2 weeks ago at a party. Yeah. But it's like, I mean, I was drinking every day, every night, whatever, right? And so when you go to like evaluating yourself and you're surprised at your own way of being, like, I'm not craving it and I don't need it, there's been a bit of a, how did I get here? And one of the big breakthroughs for me was I I actually heard a doctor talk about one of the things that happens to people, not just people who are abused, but anyone who might struggle in like a social setting, and you're looking for some way to kind of like lower the feelings you're having about the unspoken things in the room. This person described it in a way that really broke through for me, because they were like, just say, I mean, everyone has their own way that their brain processes stuff, but there are different areas where some people are like more neurodivergent than others. Yes. And they're struggling in social settings with, you know, that's an unspoken thing. And like, he's mad at her and this and that. And like people who struggle with that, but maybe because in my case, I was abused and I literally had to learn how to walk into a room and read the fucking room real quick so that I knew what was going to happen in this very intense spiritual group I was in. And I had never had someone say it in a way that broke through with me, where I was like, oh my God, like, this muscle that I've developed to survive, to be a bit of a chameleon, and to learn how to read the room of the authority figures has now developed into this incredible weakness where I can't shut it off. And I'm in a bunch of social settings. I'm like in some ways like the top dog at times because of chess.com, or I'm just dealing with shit that's happening and I'm craving alcohol because I'm looking for something to like numb the neurodivergence, empathy shit that's going on. The vigilant,
sort of suspicious nature of people's.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm everything. I'm hyper vigilant. I'm hyper observant. I'm hyper just like maybe affected at times by what's going on emotionally. And when she said that, I literally was like, just the fact that that validated what was going on. I have done so much work to now instead of craving alcohol, I do a lot of work to kind of give it back. I kind of go, this belongs to this person and this is it. And I'm not trying to get to whatever spiritual therapeutic here, but that has actually been a major breakthrough for me. The fact that I take the time to acknowledge when I'm in a world that is overwhelming me, that it's overwhelming me and that it doesn't necessarily have to, has actually completely changed my need to look to numb out, because I'm no longer needing to numb out. I'm kind of having a much more healthy boundary with weird shit that I'm experiencing. So anyway, I wanted to share that because it's been a game changer for me.
The other thing for me too, though, is, and maybe it's a little bit of age, is I don't like dealing with drunk people anymore. Yeah. Like, I don't want to deal with your shit.
Yeah.
Bottom line, like, go home and sleep it off.
Plus, when you stop drinking, you notice much more quickly how other people are when they drink. Not even like assholes when they're drunk. You just notice very quickly what it is for people who are drinking. Like, you can just tell and you go, oh man. Yeah.
So you finally leave the collective at 35? I'm assuming.
No. So
at 30.
Let's see. So my mom dies. We are in the village for, we're still in the village for a couple more years. How old am I now? I'm 39. Okay. So we're coming back. So I left the village at the age of 34 to move to Utah.
Salt Lake City. Okay. Why Salt Lake?
And that was during the pandemic. And it was because Eric, co-founder, he's been in the Bay Area this whole time. Jay is no longer with the company, but Eric and I are running this thing remotely. At this time, he knows that I've from a group. He doesn't even really know. In fact, many people still at the company until the book came out have never really known this story. And because one, I never really had a chance to properly share it. And in many ways, I think I've come to the terms of the fact that I wasn't ready to. Like, I wasn't really ready to do this. And so here I am.
Is that embarrassment?
I think it was all the things. It was genuinely that I had never been given a chance to like really think about the right way to do it. I think I didn't feel safe previously because I was still in it or close enough to it. And then, I think that there was you've heard me go on enough awkward tangents tonight. There was like a general, like, how do I explain this to people in a way that will make sense and that I don't feel like I have to hide? And so one of the things that I committed to with the book is that I said, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. And there's not going to be any versions of this where I Hollywoodified it, where I go, okay, we're going to cut 20 to 22 where I'm abusing alcohol and opioids. We're not going to do that. Like, we're not going to cut, yes, there are many other stories from people who grew up in the collective that are not mine to tell. And I did not go into, I would argue that what young women went through in the collective and the types of abuse that happened there was worse than anything I ever experienced. I think there are people who have their own potentially very rated R memoir to share if they want to. And maybe this is the beginning of a new conversation, not the closing of a chapter. And I'm ready for that. And that was partly what I committed to, was like, whether it was a combination of, I feel safe enough now, I had never really been given the right opportunity before this. And I think once I committed, which was its own fucking wild ordeal, to like go with, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to I'm really going, we're going to do this and I'm going to go all in. I think once I started doing that, I've become more determined to I guess, to stay the course. So to answer your question, I mean, as far as why I had never had, it was embarrassment and also just not having the right opportunity, you know? So then the pandemic hits in 2020.
Which had to be great for chess.com.
Huge for chess.com. Yeah. I'm still living in the village, but Eric says, hey, we're going to move to Utah. At the time, California was a total nightmare. It was also burning down. It's so funny because 2020 is remembered. California is still a nightmare. So yes, in fact, I have no problem saying that, and he would agree. So California is a nightmare, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He's watching it burn down. What's funny again is like, it's not funny, but 2020 is remembered for the biggest thing that happened, which was the pandemic, right? But there was a lot of things that happened that year. There was a lot of stuff going on we could get into, right? But one of the things that was also happening was the California fires were were really bad, especially in Northern California. And so him and his wife had kind of had enough. And he tells me, he's like, hey man, like, we're going to move to Utah. Do you want to come? And I'm like, you know, like, our life is crazy. Like, yeah, my mom died, and I skipped past. Shauna's mom had also just died. She died at 62, so we lost both our moms. So beginning of 2020, Shauna's mom gets diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and she died in June. So not a COVID death, but overnight, we've, not quite, but literally overnight, we've gone from both of our moms living in the village in a world where, yes, it is still dysfunctional to some degree. There's remnants of the old collective, but it's not really bothering us to that level. We're living in the eye of the hurricane. Both of our moms are around. In a span of 2 years, both of our moms are dead. The pandemic is hitting, and personal life is going crazy, but we're doing better. My wife and I are making it work. The kids are happy, and chess.com is killing it. And so Eric is like, hey, we're moving to Utah. And so I went home and told Shauna, I'm like, hey, like, Eric and Amy are moving to Utah. Like, that's kind of crazy, right? Because we didn't think they would ever leave where they were in Los Altos. And she's like, yeah, like, we should do a road trip. We should do a COVID road trip. No one was in school. So from July of 2020, we broke all COVID restrictions. We just decided to like get out, and we went on the massive road trip, which was amazing. We took the kids everywhere, and we went and stayed in Salt Lake just for a couple weeks just to get a feel for the area. And we loved it. And literally October 2020, we bought a house. So like, our life went from, we had been living in Tono Village, making our marriage work for the last 15 years, chess.com, overnight success 10 years later, right? It wasn't overnight success, so all kinds of grinding, but it happens. And so all of a sudden it was like life was very different. And we decided to move to Salt Lake City. And we didn't actually move until January 21, but we bought our house in October 2020.
That's awesome. How many kids now? Two?
Four.
Yeah. You guys are up to 4.
Yeah.
Good. 21.
So, well, Nash is 19. He and I will turn 20 and 40 together. So 19, 17. Hazel is about to turn 14, and then Talia is 9. So it's boy, girl, girl. So, which is awesome.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Being a girl dad is cool.
Yeah, it's.
I've got girl, boy, girl.
Okay.
So let me ask. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Hey, I'm going to write a book."
Yeah.
Somebody has got you've told your story to someone.
Yeah.
And they probably said, "Hey, dude, you need to put this down."
Yeah.
Or you and your wife are talking. What was the impetus of this book?
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned my wife, because she would always say, like, she's like, I always knew you were going to write a book. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know. But the impetus of the book story is like its own book. It's crazy because one of the things that happened during the pandemic was the level of celebrity that now was involved with chess.com overnight was like crazy. And I think everyone loves chess. And there are people who play chess all the time. People see pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing chess or whatever. But overnight, the level of celebrities who actually wanted to kind of like fuck with us, they're like, hey, the chess.com guys, you guys are awesome, right? And so I was developing friendships with all types of A-listers, and some still behind the scenes, some whatever. But one of the people who I had become really good friends with is Logic, the rapper.
Yeah.
Bobby Hall. And and again, it's just crazy when we tell it this way. So Bobby and I had developed an online relationship where I'm giving him some chess lessons. We're broing it out. We're also sharing very openly about our lives and like being, struggling with depression and anxiety and dealing with shit. And we're doing this the whole time. I think he lives in Malibu And he thinks I live in Arizona because neither of us have been public about moving. We've known each other for a year and we're good friends now, but had never met in person. And we're having a conversation over one like random, chess kind of Zoom call. And I mentioned that I'm like, yeah, well, we recently moved to Utah. Like I'm getting settled. He's like, motherfucker, get out. I think that's exactly what Bobby says, because that's how he talks. He's like, motherfucker, get out of here. And I'm like, what? He's like, dude, I'm in Utah. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I'm like, and I don't want to say the town he's in, but he's like, I'm here. And I'm like, bro, you're fucking 5 minutes from me. And he's like, it was like literally one of those like, what? So I drive down to his house. Like we end up, and now we're like hanging out in Utah. And right at that time, Bobby had gone through a bunch of shit as a rapper, not telling his story, but he was like semi-retired and he was writing his memoir, This Bright Future. Check it out, by the way. Great. Bobby's had a crazy fucking life, This Bright Future. So Bobby Hall is wrapping up his memoir and I go down to his house and we are drinking that night and we are killing a bottle of Macallan. I won't lie. There's a lot going on with that. So we're drinking this bottle of scotch and I'm opening up about my life because he starts with the fact that he's writing a memoir. So I'm like listening and asking questions. And then he starts asking me, I'm telling him about my life. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, this is crazy. And we had been approached by the idea of doing a documentary about chess and Danny Rensch because people kind of knew I came from a cult. So he's like, dude, you're not doing a fucking documentary. You're doing a memoir. I'm wrapping up mine. I know I can fast track you to my agent. Yeah. Like it's the right way to do it. And so overnight I went from having no clue of where I would go to start my story to Logic putting me on a fast track to deal with one of the best literary agents in the world, Sarah. Love you. She's amazing. And working with Hachette, who ultimately bought the rights. And so I sell the rights to the story because, I mean, we did a whole proposal week, which anyone who ever writes a book, if you're fortunate enough that the publishers want your story, I got to do a day of like where they all bid on my story. So we had like 12 hours of meetings and, I'm being kind of interviewed. You're kind of feeling each other out, but in the end, they're all going to make offers. And we ended up in a spot where Hachette made a good offer, and we went with them. So yeah, I guess I'm not answering necessarily the philosophical why I felt ready, but I would say as far as how it happened, it came together very quickly. So I have answered the question of why I wrote a memoir several different ways. Sometimes I answer it with a little bit of like a spiritual like. I wrote the memoir because I was asked to write the memoir, and I do feel like it kind of fell on my lap. And I, in my own world of like, some version of the surrender experiment, I tend to believe in that. And I was like, all right, the fact that I even started the conversation with myself, like I have moved to Utah now, like both our moms are dead, like life has changed forever. Like I'm processing and feeling like what my life has been in a way that is so heavy that I healed my relationship with my mom and then lost her and learned so many lessons about grief along the way that I'm still learning. So that happens. And I've got this incredibly undeniable success story with chess.com. And because when you're making the pitch to they tell you your story is crazy. They're like, you mean the guy who basically sits on the Iron Throne of chess is only there because he was kidnapped from his mom because he was raised in a spiritual cult? Like, sign me up, right? This is going to be a book, right? And so that was happening. And then I think the fact that I had time to process and consider that I would, and then realizing back to the point you asked earlier, which is not so much that I had been embarrassed, but I had never really been able to like connect my world authentically before. And if I was ever going to do it, like this was the time, because while I don't know what's next for chess.com, I don't know if it's IPO or if it's this, at some point you start to have these like desires to make a difference and to have an impact outside of like the lane of chess business. Yeah. And there was an idea here that I could actually in a very real way show people that my life, believe it or fucking not, is a crazy story where the fact that I am this person is because of all the trauma I went through. Like literally the obstacle is what got me here. And there was nothing but a determined feeling of like, I can do this. Like I got to do this. So here we are.
First, do the documentary.
Yes.
After the book comes out, do the documentary. That is a great story. My wife and I would watch that. Not because I met you, not because I like you, because that's a great story. Let me end with this. First off, thank you for the vulnerability. Thank you for the truth. I mean, that's hard to do, but It sounds like the book is as authentic as you could have made it. You spared no details. And I want this to be the last question. You did that with the intent to drive some impact in other people's lives. Mm-hmm. What do you hope people gain from reading this book?
Yeah. We are not what happens to us. We are what we choose to become. Carl Jung. I didn't invent that. But I really do believe that we have a choice at every time to believe that everything happens for a reason, but the twist ending is you get to choose the reason. And I think if anyone hears a story that is kind of uniquely fucked up, but also uniquely inspiring with any other goal than like, hey, like maybe I can be the alchemist of my own shit. And I think that there's, again, I've joked that everyone likes saying the obstacle is the way, but no one likes to say that while they're in the middle of the shit. You like to say that after. You like to say it once you've overcome. You say, oh, it was the way that I needed to have the perspective and the gratitude that I now carry. But I think there are times where we can hear other people's stories and choose to take a different perspective. And it is a wild story because when you know you're going to be asked this question, you know, you want to really say it and not even be self-righteous about it because I'm not. But also anyone who now knows me knows hey, like I'm not full of shit when I say like I didn't really do this for any other like bigger reason. But now that I'm here, I want to have as big of an impact as I can because the only reason to do it is to help anyone else out there have the courage to name their abuse for what it is, to break their own cycle. If their cycle is hiding from who they are and believing that they need to keep that shit secret, like you don't, and that actually you can be an alchemist of your own story. I'm literally sitting here where what transformed from trauma, abuse, abduction, and then ultimately like neglect that happened that led to health put me in a position to do what I'm doing today. And in no way am I trying to be dismissive that there are those who are actually disadvantaged by abuse. But the first step is actually acknowledging what you're going through and then deciding what you're going to do about it. Because ultimately, you are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to become. And unless the world is going to be over in 5 years from now, you are also yourself in 5 years looking back at yourself now and looking at what decisions you're making, right? They say that self-discipline is the ultimate form of self-love. And it took me a lot of years to learn that. And I think that I do that with my kids now. There is a 10-year-old now who is, I said, my oldest son's 19. I just told him this the other night. I said, he's dealing with all kinds of shit about what he wants to do and everything feels so big and it is big. But I'm like, hey dude, remember when you were 9 years old and you literally like couldn't go to the Diamondbacks camp because you were crying, you were scared, you were anxious. I'm like, hey, like look at 19-year-old now, like 6'1", like total stud. Like what would you even say to that kid? You would say, one, don't deny your feelings. Your feeling, it's okay. You would say it's okay, but you would also have some perspective that while the feelings are real and it's good to feel them, that there's something bigger and you're going to be okay. Everybody has that 10 year later than themselves looking at it. And I'm trying to share a story that, you know, if anything can help people have that perspective.
Have your kids read it yet?
The two older ones have.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Nash and Warner. It's funny. Warner, the 17-year-old, Nash is a little more like plays it close to the chest in terms of how he feels about it. And also he lived watching a lot of what happened in my relationship with my dad. And even if he was younger, like, I think there's more, we are still unpacking a lot of this stuff.
Trauma for him as well.
Warner has been fascinated and obsessed with every aspect that he didn't understand. And there's even a very big moment I share in the book where Warner was kind of, he was kind of the epiphany I needed to like get a slap in the face in a particular conversation that I was having with my wife and with my dad and Marlo. And so for him to kind of see what happened there and like this critical moment where in some ways, the best way to put it is I chose him and my wife versus doing my dad's pattern, versus leaving my wife and believing that he was not my spiritual kid. And I think there was something to that was kind of like, I mean, not that we needed that anyway, but I think he's like seen a lot of stuff of like, wow, like you have had a fucked up story, Dad. Like this is kind of wild. So yeah.
And you've given them a good life. It's always good to break the cycle so that they're not exposed to that for a good majority of their life. So that's, hey man, this is an amazing story. guys, go check out Dark Squares, How Chess Saved My Life. It came out on the 16th of September. Is that correct?
Yep.
I know anywhere books are sold, but go to Amazon, order it. Let's support Danny out. I guarantee you'll learn something from the book. And I can't thank you enough for flying out here, man, and coming on the podcast.
Dude,
this has
thanks
been
for
great.
having me. Seriously, this is great.
And congrats on the business. And I'll be watching closely to see what happens, just from a perspective of I love watching people grow businesses, because I couldn't imagine that. And that's insane, dude. Everything you guys have done to get to this point.
Thanks, man.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.